Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burnettwork and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, RM, and tonight we have with us Catherine Cooke. Catherine, how are you tonight?
Good.
Pleasure to have you here. Catherine and I are going to be reviewing Ferrari, a 2023 film about Enzo Ferrari. Certainly, such an incredible film, Catherine. And certainly, I didn't know what to expect from this film. I didn't really hear much about it. What I can say is that I had heard that it was starring Adam Driver, who seems to have a certain knack for playing Italian characters. Uh,
Does he?
well, he played Richie, in the movie with, I think it was Lady Gaga who played, his
I,
wife.
I read a review where somebody said, okay, after watching Ferrari, somebody said, okay, Adam, that's 2 strikes against you. If you get a 3rd strike, you can't come back to Italy.
And he played Enzo in this one, and, of course, the film, goes hand in hand together with Penelope Cruz, who I think also, did a great job of playing Laura Ferrari, in the film. In fact, without the 2 of them doing this, this film would fall very flat. I think that the combination of the 2 of them together, makes a film that's incredibly interesting and has there's just so much passion and feeling behind their performances in the film, that I enjoyed it so much, and I really do think that this is the type of role that really gave Penelope Cruz a moment to shine in a way we don't always see her. She has a very strong accent, and sometimes, when she gets cast, it's not easy to always understand her. But in this particular case, playing with an Italian accent, she seemed quite well suited for the role. What do you think, Catherine, about Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz's chemistry together in this film?
That was pretty good. I've always understood Penelope Cruz when she talks, so that was easy. And she is like a scene stealer in this movie. I think she probably gave the best performance in the movie. Adam Driver, it took me a while to come around to the idea of him playing this character because one, he seems way too young. I could see through the makeup is just a little weird and almost fourth wall breaking. It's like, yeah, that's Adam Driver trying to do a light accent with this weird hair. It's like yeah, like that something just didn't feel right about it. But I did eventually come around to it about probably a third of the way into the movie. It's like, okay, it's okay, but I didn't buy that he would be leaving Penelope Cruz for Shailene Woodley. No, it's like, that's not happening in this movie universe. But it is.
Well, this is a big score for Shailene Woodley. Honestly, this is not the type of thing I really associate with her. Not that she isn't capable of it, but
Yeah.
there were so many well-known actors in this film, and it's not that she herself isn't a well-known actress, but I don't see her necessarily in this realm of acting. And I think she gave it her best shot in it, but
Yeah, there wasn't much meat on the roll, to be fair. It was kind of like, she's there just kind of being the nagging third wheel. Oh, when are you gonna move in with me type thing. Like she didn't really. I couldn't remember exactly how this story went in real life, so I couldn't remember if there was going to be like some dramatic confrontation between the 2 of them or where that was going to go. And so, in a sense, I was kind of watching, waiting for it. But because this has a very bizarre structure to it, like there's no real beginning or ending. It's just a few months in 1957, like a snapshot of this is Ferrari. This is how he deals with stuff, and so you don't really I mean, there is a hint of a narrative in there with the wife finding out about the kid, or on the verge of finding out about it, and it's like, oh, okay, so that kind of has its own little arc in it. But I, I can't remember exactly again how that whole thing. They summed it up in like little intertitles at the end, but I was thinking there was going to be more of a dramatic point made of it rather than just committing it to intertitles, you know, at the end of it. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point, and certainly, as far as I'm concerned, I thought the script was pretty good, for what they were trying to do. They wanted to just focus on what I consider a very pivotal moment in the history of the Ferrari, company, and it does culminate around Enzo Ferrari, his wife, and the business that he holds so dear. I loved how he was portrayed by Adam Driver, mainly because he took the approach of trying to show Ferrari as this person who not only designs and develops cars for a living, but also is someone who picks out the racing team that's going to represent his cars and hopefully lead to him being able to race even more cars. And, he kind of boasts him, being someone who's really just wants to race and doesn't necessarily care about selling cars. But honestly, Catherine, when your company is going to become insolvent or nearly becoming insolvent, you have to care a little bit about, the sale of cars and making and turning a profit. And I think I'm a little surprised that that attitude would be there. I would imagine that they just keep working as hard as they can and realize that after so long that they have to focus on clientele in order to, get a profit and continue. But overall, for me, Catherine, this film was kind of cool looking and slick. The racing scene was perfectly filmed, the sound, it looked like you were kind of just put into this lifestyle of the racing elite, if you will. And I just love hearing him kind of like off the cuff say, well, Maserati is doing this and Lamborghini's doing that. And I'm like, how cool is it to just be able to throw out Ferrari, Maserati, Lamborghini, just at the drop of the hat, just throw out those cool
Well, it's
names.
funny because, like you said, he truly. I mean, yes, from a practicality standpoint, you're right. He should worry about selling cars because, like, the CFO says, you know how many cars we sold this year? 98, 9,800? No, 98, because he was an artist. Like, he just cared about making the perfect cars. And yeah, on the outside, he would boast about the drivers, but privately, he didn't really consider giving the drivers any credit. He just credited it all to the car. And like, he didn't like, the Maseratis and Lamborghinis because they were more, not just in racing, but they were, it was part of the business for them as well, selling cars. Whereas Ferrari, he didn't care as much about the business because they were, as we know from the Ford versus Ferrari film, the buyout that eventually happens from Fiat doesn't come until about 6 or 7 years after the events of this movie. And so the fact that they were facing, bankruptcy for several years because he was just not willing, like, he couldn't stand the idea of selling to Ford. And as the Ford versus Ferrari movie shows it, it's because they wouldn't grant him total control over the racing division, because that's truly what he wanted more than anything. He was actually offered $18 million by Ford to buy it earlier in 1953 or whatever, and he turned it down because they wouldn't grant him control over the racing division. Which, yeah, back in those, I mean, nowadays obviously Ferrari's worth an insane amount of money, like billions. His son, the illegitimate son that he has, Shane Woodley's character, he's a billionaire today running Ferrari. But back in those days, because like you said, they're near bankruptcy. $18 million buyout would be a lot of money and really helpful, but he wouldn't do it because he truly did care about that name. It meant something, and it was like an artist. It has to go to somebody who actually is going to care, but he doesn't want to give it up either, which is why you could tell he's obsessed with having wanting to have an heir. And the movie, of course, picks up a year after his son's death. I can't remember the disease name off the top of my head, but that was one of the great scenes where he's talking to his wife about how he learned more about all of the intricacies of his son's disease than he ever knew about cars.
Yeah.
Because he was just desperate to save his son. Not just because so much because he wanted him to take over the company, but because it was his son. He cared. And now after he lost his son, it's like, well, I can't publicly acknowledge my other son because I'm keeping a secret from the wife. So I'll put everything into these cars. Like, these cars are like everything for him. And so I like that it really demonstrated that well. And they also didn't explicitly state it, but they hinted in the beginning when he's at the training course that he doesn't want to get close to his drivers because many of, like, in a 9-10 year period, he lost 6 drivers and he didn't want to get close to them. Some of them he was very close to, and he couldn't bear doing that anymore, which is why you see in the beginning when that one driver gets killed test driving it, he kind of has this somewhat cold response while the guy's, wife or girlfriend, whoever it was standing right there, and she's totally mortified, and he's just kind of remaining almost stoic, and he just says to his guy next to him, "Tell the other guy we can sign him on sign him on Monday." You're like totally, cold, and it's like, oh man, did you really just say that with her just standing right there? It was like, yeah. So it's kind of like, it's a neat movie because it's kind of showing you all these different. It's not trying to do a basic biopic type stuff where we just highlight certain things in your life. It's like, no, we're going to give you a sense of who he was, what he was dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to pick one of the most tumultuous time periods, which was 1957, the winter and spring of 1957.
Yeah, it certainly was a tumultuous time, and we do see some very interesting points. And as you mentioned, Catherine, you weren't that fond with them just sort of showing you on the screen that it was a company started by he and Laura together. However, I think it is very interesting because she is kind of a holder of power, if not half of the power of the company. And often the cards that she has to play are ones against the personal wishes of her husband, so to speak, in name. In opposed to saying, I want, the company to go in this direction or that direction, we find her saying things like, well, the agreement was that you were supposed to be here at 9 o'clock, or, the agreement is you're not going to be able to do that and acknowledge this person. Very personal wishes versus saying, I think we should make more sedans or something,
And yet she was fine with him having mistresses, saying you can have all the mistresses you want, I don't care, but you were gonna be here in the morning to have breakfast before the maid shows up, you know? And it's like, wow, that's kind of an interesting relationship dynamic.
It was an interesting, relationship dynamic, but what was also interesting, Catherine, and I'm sure you noticed this, was how much smack talk she got from the rest of the family in particular, and I'm assuming it's Enzo's mother,
Oh,
who he just has no respect for Laura, and Laura has to deal with this, and it's almost cruel in some points, Catherine.
well, it is. The mother I thought was really vicious. He's like, "Well, I gave him an heir. It's not my fault that he died." And the mother's like, "Oh, well, that one wasn't enough." Being all prissy about it, and like you could tell that really you probably weren't hampering her about this before the son died, you know. Uh, and it's like, yeah, she's being cheated on all the time. She's not really being respected as part of the company, even though, like you said, she does hold a lot of the cards. He's always off doing other things and obsessing over his cars now, and yet people keep giving her crap all the time, and it's like, you know, uh, kind of messed up. And like his excuse for why he wants to have her sign over the shares is that, well, I need to be the one holding all the cards at the table. It's like, well, no, I could be the one holding the card and tell him. He's like, I have to no. And like when she says no, tell him you said I'm said no. It's like I can't tell him that you said no. It's like, yes, you can. You're Ferrari. Like that name means something. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, and that certainly did represent the power she had and the cooperation that he was almost pretty much, I'm not gonna say begging, but, almost pleading with her, "I look very weak in front of everyone else having to go back to you and ask these favors." But then on top of all of it, Catherine, to hear his own mother say that, she lost a son in the Great War and that the wrong son died, that was even shocking. It's like his mother was being kind of presented with sort of like a heartless, depiction, and, it was, I could almost see in a sense how, let's say the main character, Enzo, was running away from all of that in a sense, Catherine, if you will, the death of his son, his mother, not being happy that he survived, and his older brother, her favorite, didn't survive. And so in a sense, he's almost like running away from that circumstance of having to deal with those emotions and what's happened to the marriage between he and his and Laura. So I think it was very interesting showing the dynamic, because a lot of these circumstances that they presented are legitimate reasons why people don't or avoid family, family and relationships. And they didn't have to go to that extent. It was so well placed and so properly presented that you didn't question it, because, you would talk about losing someone while you were at a gravesite, looking at loss, looking at remembrance about someone you care about. And also, the different circumstances when Laura realizes that her husband has a residence somewhere else and she wants to go, and the driver won't take her there. He pretends to miss the turn. Little things like that, these little nuances in the movie. I almost don't know whether it was almost as if they didn't want her to know because they cared, not because, of what she was going to do. And I also got that sense. So
well,
it was really
I
interesting.
I think it was also more of them respecting him and his wishes, because he was like a god to the people in this city, in this country. You know, as one of the guys in the comments there said, he changed the game for Formula One. It's like he practically invented it, virtually keeping it alive and going. And so, um, the fact that nearly everybody in town and in the company all knew that he had this mistress and this son with the mistress, and she was the only one kept in the dark, seems insane with the way gossip works that she wouldn't know about it, but she didn't, because they looked up to him and they respected him and they loved it, and you know, they all idolized him because of everything he was doing for it. Whereas the mother probably just saw it as, oh, you're just too obsessed with, your your cars and the racing and all that kind of stuff, because she clearly didn't know he had another son. But as we see the big thing at the end of the movie, which not really spoilers, because it's, history, when she says, "Look, I cashed the check that you didn't want me to cash until the sale came, and I will donate the money back to you to save your company as long as you do not give your son your family name during my lifetime." And he accepts, and it's just insane, right? And he's actually, it's like she's fine with him finally publicly acknowledging the son and raising the son or whatever, but oh, you can't give him your name. And it's like, wait a minute. At that point, I'm like, well, it seems like you should be obviously rightly upset that he's been keeping this other family from you, but it's like you're upset now because of what the name means on a more pop culture sense rather than just the family name, right? Because after all, she doesn't have a problem with him bringing him into the home, raising him as a son, and all that. Oh, but you can't give him the name because the name means something, and she was holding the cards and wants part of the credit almost, but you're not going to give the credit to him, not while I'm around, because she doesn't like the idea of him potentially moving on to the next son. Because again, this is only like 6 months or so after their son died. So she's like still grieving that and is kind of upset that no sooner than her son dies, he just goes straight back to the cars. It's like, no, you're not just going to pass this thing off to your mistress's son like it was nothing. And yet he does, and yet rather than fighting her on it and trying to come to terms with it, he's just like, okay, fine, I won't do it. And he just takes the money to save the company because he just wants to keep racing those cars.
He does, and he believes in self-preservation. I think, there was absolutely nothing he could have said or deal he could have worked out where he could acknowledge his son. And I think he also realized that. And certainly when she says, "Oh, there's no conditions, but you can't do this," she's a real negotiator with him. And as I said before, but it's for personal reasons. These personal reasons that fall heavily on her that she feels she has to. And amongst this elite, Catherine, where we have this incredible soundtrack and sound editing, and we see all these different cultural norms associated with racing and Italian life of this particular set and the backdrop of Italy, it is breathtaking, and I can understand how she feels. Everyone knows who she is, and they're in the tabloids and the papers are everywhere, and there's articles constantly about them. What did you make of the depiction of how they were covered, let's say during that time period in 1957 in Italy, and kind of the circle of racing elite that they were in?
Well, again, I think that also comes back to her frustration. Like, as we see, she goes outside just to go get some groceries, and she's being like completely surrounded by paparazzi and hounded, wanting to know everything about the media. And to give a sense of how much extra power they have, Ferrari has the ability to just tell certain journalists to go away. Oh, you wrote that about me. Get out of here. And they don't even fight him on it. Whereas imagine if that happened today, where somebody said, "Oh, you wrote something bad about me. Go away." They would scream, "Oh, violation of free speech, censorship," and all that kind of stuff. Whereas these guys just kind of accepted it and walk away because even they know they can't really cross Ferrari. And that's the kind of power this guy has. And so you're constantly living under that microscope, but at the same time, a lot of them are kind of tiptoeing around. They don't want to be too critical, even though they're desperate for information. And we know they managed to keep their lives safeguarded because the one journalist says, "Okay, I'll do this corrupt thing for you and spread this false rumor to help your bankruptcy thing, but only if you give me an exclusive about your private life." Because they were very private. Not a lot of people knew. I mean, yeah, they knew he had a mistress and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't know all the juicy details of what was going on behind closed doors. And for her to not be allowed to be publicly acknowledged as the one holding a lot of the cards in the company and having to just play, the role of the loyal wife, and her also, in addition to her frustrations that no sooner than their son died, he's just going straight back to, because the thing he's trying to do in this movie is get his drivers entered in that 1,000-mile race. That's the climax of the film. That's primarily what he's focused on. And she just can't stand this idea that they're going bankrupt and all of this. And he's even having to think about his personal finances, only to find out that he's been giving all this money for years to this other and to this other woman. And so you can imagine how she's feeling, because all these people in the media are obsessed with kowtowing to her husband no matter what. And yet she can't get answers from anybody about what's going on, and how horrible that must feel when she finds out the inevitable fact that everybody knew about this except for her. And it's almost like at that point she probably doesn't care what they write about her anymore, because hence why she doesn't want them to give the Ferrari name to this other kid. It means something. It's like, no, I'm the one who saved this company because I've been holding the cards and I chose to give the money back to you. I am getting the credit for it. So she does care about credit and stuff like that a little bit, but man, those paparazzi stuff, it's kind of weird because I can never imagine that happening today, where paparazzi and journalists would just agree to not print things about somebody. I mean, unless it was like a severely skewed, politically biased publication wanting to make their guy look good. It's like, well, I couldn't imagine them doing this with any other public figure like that, where, oh, we're only going to print good stuff, or, oh, he doesn't like it. Okay, I guess we'll just go away, even though we've been waiting out here for hours. It's like, no, it's so surreal. But that's the kind of status he had in Italy. It's kind of crazy to think about.
It is 100% crazy to think about. And I also think that one of the other things that I find fascinating overall is how they did such a great job of showing Enzo as a master of organizing an effective racing team, and also developing the cars as well. And he was able to utilize each racer's strengths and weaknesses, and it was wonderful seeing him organize that and get everybody together and knowing who he wanted where. But it was also hard to see him kind of vilify. They this name, I guess they called him the Widow Maker. And certainly in the beginning of the film, we saw something that kind of, I'm not going to say demonstrated that, but as you said, he'd lost a lot of racers. But it is interesting, but because even he, as the character, makes a point in the film and says, look, anybody can drive this car. If you lost your best friend on Friday, you'd be back in the seat racing on Sunday. And I thought that that was a very cheeky comment to make for these men who also, like himself, put their life on the line to do these racing scenes. But the racing scenes, Catherine, these crashes were disturbing. What did you think? I mean, even the one in the beginning was quite dramatic and shocking, but I had no idea we were going to see another one at the end.
Yeah, I knew that's what it was building up to. So for me, there was tension because I'm like, I know that the crash happened 40 miles away from the finish line for this 1,000-mile race, and I knew how bad the crash was, but I wasn't sure. I thought, oh, they're not going to show that, are they? And to see how much they showed of that and how graphic it was, I'm like, oh my God. Because when it cut to the random family sitting at the table, I'm like, what's this about? And then you see the people outside, I'm like, oh God, the kid's gonna get it, isn't it? And then he does. And they don't mention it in the movie, but within 3 days, that accident happened May 12th, 1957. 3 days later, the Italian government permanently banned all street racing in Italy, a ban that is still in effect today. It was like a rude awakening, because I was even shocked watching, because I knew that they would have street races, but I was thinking it was more in the vein of like the 24 hours of Le Mans, where the roads are kind of closed, even though there's the public streets, but they're closed to the public for the day of the race. Well, here I was watching this, and I noticed they were passing like regular pedestrian cars going the speed limit. I'm like, wait a minute, what would happen if they happened to be going around like a blind curve or something? I'm like, this is insane that they actually did this and were allowed to do this. Because I would have assumed that they would. I mean, obviously you can't close 1,000 miles of road, but like in certain segments, because they know estimated when the drivers are going to be coming through. Like, oh, we're going to temporarily close this for a couple hours today when the drivers come through. But no, it's just wide open, and I'm like, this is crazy. Even in the town squares where they just have like one level of hay bales separating the people from the cars, I'm like, this is insane. It's like these people are playing. It's even more dangerous than the running of the bulls when you think about it. I mean, it's crazy, and yet the attitude these drivers have is like when the one there played by Patrick Dempsey pulls over to help the Maserati guy to give him a ride because of good sportsmanship, and they get back to the pit stop, and the Maserati boss is upset, saying, You use all those photographers. They saw Maserati getting a lift from a Ferrari. How dare you?" type of thing. And yet and that's the kind of mindset these guys have, and yet nobody is really thinking about just how insane it is that you're racing on public streets like that without, the people have a decent idea of when you're coming through, but still, I'm like, how did nobody think this was an insane idea before this horrible tragedy occurred? It was just really, I couldn't believe it, because I'm familiar with that, but I guess I always took it for granted that, oh, of course they have their public roads closed at certain. Oh, and that crash, oh my God, that was really graphic, and like they say, it's almost a bit callous how he shows up there and their primary concern is to get the car because he wants to prove as quickly as possible that it wasn't the car's fault, and they prove that. But there is one little bit where somebody, I guess, said that, oh, it's going to blow over or whatever. He's like, oh, they know their risks, and then he says, well, not the children, because he is sympathetic to that it did kill those kids. But he did make sure at the same time that he was quick to separate himself from any liability.
Yeah, and that was something that I think we all were concerned about, and they made a good point in the film showing us how the car rode over some sort of imperfection on the road, which damaged the tire, and hence that led to this horrific crash. Really one of the worst ones I've ever seen.
Yeah, he was
And
going 150 miles an hour in real life when that happened.
oh my gosh. It was just really unbelievable, Catherine. And I think that the film did do a great job of showing these risks and trying to give us a good point of the mindset of the racers and their fragility. Even the racers themselves, were risking so much and then also putting others at risk. Um, Honestly, risks that most people would never take. Even the imaginable now of someone going that fast in a residential street seems ridiculous, but this was this race that, and inevitably he won, right, Catherine? Uh,
The Patrick Dempsey character won the race, but they were all thinking the other guy on the far right there, Delgado, was gonna win because he was presented as like the playboy type guy. He lived that type of lifestyle, was really popular, and much like Ferrari says, don't bring your super famous actress girlfriends to my racing paddock because the cameras will all be on them instead of me. And you see that moment in the movie where he's kind of annoyed that the actress shows up and he puts his arm around her and pulls her aside to make sure the logo on the car is seen. And so that guy was kind of like the favorite people thought was going to win the race because he was this, oh man, he's going to be the new golden boy for Ferrari. And he was only 28 years old. And then that happened. And then the Patrick Dempsey character, his name escapes me. He, won the race, and fortunately, he went on to have a longer life. He wasn't, killed in any accidents like a lot of these guys were that we saw in like Ford v Ferrari and stuff.
Well, what's interesting about this is that even after Enzo and let's say and Ferrari team find out, let's say that they're not going to go to prison or be prosecuted for what's happening, it doesn't make you feel any better. And certainly, no one feels better after seeing something so horrific. And I think that they made a good point of showing something that can be, once again, another bittersweet circumstance for the company, where even though they won, boy, at what a price. Unfortunately, one of the team members and what was it, 9 people with,
9 people, including 5 children,
oh,
amongst the nine, and that's why that one moment when Ferrari says, "Well, the kids didn't, like they didn't have each other, like you can't blame the kids for that." So it's like it showed that he cared, and I was kind of expecting, like, is he going to do something? I can't remember if he did anything for that, but no, once he exonerates himself, it's like right back to racing. And then even shortly after that, when the wife confronts him about oh, don't give the son our name, it's like you would think that'd be the time after that accident, even though they didn't cause it, you'd want to take a step back and think for a minute, especially for a guy who just lost his own son like 5 or 6 months before the events of the movie. And instead, nope, he just wants to preserve that name and get right back to racing and get into it, which is why Ferrari was always dominant at those competitions, and it was only in those 3 straight years that Ford beat him, as we saw in the Ford v Ferrari thing, and at which point they gave up because Ferrari was always more about racing than he was about selling cars for profit. Whereas obviously that's very different now with his sons, running the company. Ferrari is obviously a very profitable company, but they still are very devoted to racing as well.
yeah, and there seemed to be a certain amount of urgency for Enzo to promote the business, and we did see him, selling his cars, which I'm sure were incredibly expensive then and equally expensive now, to literal royalty. And he makes a comment about, and I kind of love this part. He makes a comment about how this new driver that he's taken on, I believe it's the newer driver, that Tyrone Power left Rita Hayworth for that actress he was seeing, and then that actress left Tyrone Power to be with him.
Mhm.
And this very interesting mysticism, if you will, around, this kind of excitement of a race car driver. I mean, when you think about it, um, there's a scene where she's with she's with him and they don't have a lot of time. I get a sense they don't have a lot of time. It's an intimate moment and the guy like takes all of his clothes off. And I kind of laughed at it because he's got to hurry back to that track and start racing again because Enzo is like clocking him hard, right, Catherine?
Yeah.
Even though he's with this actress and Enzo's like, well, I don't really like actresses because they take away screen time for Ferrari. And if Ferrari wasn't here, you probably wouldn't be racing anything because you need me, you need my car, you need high performance, you need that need for speed, if you will. And it was true. He's absolutely right. And so this guy's like, okay, if I'm going to sleep with her, we don't have a lot of time. He kind of rips off his clothes. And I just thought like how funny it was in a sense because he was so excited to be with this woman. And as I said, this thing about her leaving Tyrone Power for him. And that's why we go to see films like this, Catherine, is because we want to see the excitement of these race car drivers. There is a certain sense of excitement and you get that in this film, especially with, it feels like these guys kind of do have a little bit of a jet set style of lifestyle, even though he takes the train coming into the station, right? He doesn't have any special car driving him in. But when he arrives, Catherine, there's all these phone calls, right? And it is something that is the heartbeat of the film. It's the heartbeat, I think, of Enzo Ferrari, the excitement of knowing that his team will be the best. And it is exciting. And that's what we want to see. Race car driving is exciting. And I think that's what we got here. I think that's what they achieved in this film.
It's like
And
he says, when you get into my car, you get into win.
yes, I just love the attitude of it. And I think that it's not everybody can pull this off. So for me, I was happy with what Adam Driver was able to do. Who would you pick if it wasn't Adam Driver to play Enzo
So
Ferrari?
well, somebody Italian. I'd have to go into Italian actors for that because this guy's got considered, again, like so iconic over there. And I do think Adam Driver is a bit young for playing Enzo at nearly 60 years old or so in this movie. Uh, but the thing I think they do capture is how one of the key difference between him and say Carroll Shelby. There's two parallel scenes actually where in Ferrari, you mentioned how he makes cars for actual kings. And when King Hussein shows up to get his car, Ferrari's very concerned. He's like, why do you have the top down in the right? No, get it back in there. I want it spotless before he sees it. I'll stall him. And then he goes in there when the king wants to see the car. And he's like, oh, did you adjust my measurements? Last time I couldn't even reach the pedals. He's like, no, I got it this time. And he's showing him around the car. And you could tell Ferrari's taking pride in showing him the car because this is what he takes pride in. Whereas a similar scene in 4v Ferrari, this couple shows up to pick up their Cobra from Shelby's garage at formerly at LAX, and one of the sales associates comes in, and Ray McKay and Kate's like, "Hey, Shelby, you want to come out and meet him? They're selling the car." He's like, "Why?" He's like, "What are you talking about? I sold him the car. It's not a meet and greet. Go." He's treating it more as a business. Ferrari is like, "No, this is his pride and joy. This is his baby." Like for Shelby, he was competing for the Le Mans thing in that film because he saw a business opportunity with Ford. Whereas Ferrari's doing it not on at the expense of his business because he cares about the cars and is that much of an artist, which is why, as you see, he doesn't care much for the racers. It's like, no, the car is you need me and my cars more than I need you, because he's like, racers are a dime a dozen, but you got to get in this car to win. And so that's like the key. You haven't really seen other people like that, moguls running racings, and the reason you don't is because, as we see in the film, he's nearly going bankrupt from it. Like you need to have it be a big business selling thousands of cars a year if you're going to compete in all the racing circuits at the level that he did.
Yeah, you really do. And certainly, I think that they made a good job of demonstrating that while it is true that the name was popular and everybody knows his name in racing, he's well known internationally. Even he has some issues with the company and its solvency. And I'm not going to say it has anything to do necessarily with Laura. I think that she's done everything that she can. And we actually do see where she does take care of certain details, where she talks about insurance and, let's figure out where money is going here and there. And certainly that is a big part of what she does. And I'm sure had been doing maybe for the past 20 years when they first started the business, however long it was. So she did play a certain role. But I think, honestly, one thing that the movie also demonstrated was how broken she was after losing her son. And certainly, Catherine, that dramatic scene where she almost, I'm going to say she blames Enzo for the death of her son. I'm not so surprised by that scene. In fact, I think we do see circumstances where this happens to couples. When you lose a child, and the person's response is, they have to blame someone, and sometimes it can be the spouse. So I think that that was, an incredibly touching way. Perhaps it's not what happened, but an incredibly touching way to show that she's still, it's still very fresh to her. She's still dealing with this. And certainly, as I said before, I got the impression that Enzo, it's not that he doesn't love his son, but he is running away from Laura as she talks about this particular topic, and does not want to address this with her, because he, feels as if he did everything he can. And certainly, I'm not here to judge him, but he does not want to relive this over and over again with her. But Laura wants to relive it. She
But he
wants.
does go to the cemetery literally every day and
Mhm.
talks to him and keeps him updated about everything that's happening every day. And that's just how he's dealing with it, is going back to his cars and doing what he was doing before. Like he said, he became just as obsessed and intricate trying to learn about how to save his son from this disease as he is about the cars. And it's like that's his escape. And ultimately, what motivates him to try and prevent the insolvency is the fact that his CFO tells him, look, if you don't do this, you won't be able to race. We don't have the money to keep doing this anymore. And that's what finally gets him to start, making moves. But the racing thing is like an escape from it. And it's him continuing that same meticulous nature. Like he tells her in that argument, I did everything I could possibly do, learned everything I could ever have imagined about this thing, and it didn't help diddly squat. And so he's like taking that same hyped up meticulous nature and just going right back to what he does well, and that's how he's dealing with it. And it's
And
just that you have all the stress of that combined with the wife finding out about the kid, all kind of imploding in around the same time.
And he does seem like the type of person, at least as portrayed in the film, as someone who goes the extra mile and dots all the I's and crosses all the T's. He's not somebody who's just going to let something go. He's incredibly thorough, and he's thinking about all the variables. To be honest with you, I didn't know anything about this story, but I knew nothing about, honestly, racing during this time period. But I'm so glad that I saw this film, because I think it really does demonstrate this moment in time, as we said, that seems so important to the company, especially to, let's say, laws about racing, especially in Italy. And I just want to say hello to Paul from Long Beach, who I saw the film with. Hi, Paul, and Mikey Lito. We saw this film on Tuesday. And it was a great time. Chef Nation says, hello, beautiful people. Haven't seen the film, but I'm going to see it this weekend. And also hello to Daniel Berry Sports Highlights. How you doing? Chef Nation says that Enzo Ferrari changed the game for Formula One racing. Yes, I can see that. Catherine, and it's true that we saw some scenes where we saw Enzo on the table designing engines, which I didn't know he did. And then we even see some factory scenes where the engines are in the process of being manufactured. And then there's one scene right before the race where you got to see some of the cars inside, once again, inside of the garage, and one isn't even painted yet. It's just stained, like in the stainless steel condition. And seeing that factory level, it was fun. It was like going to a museum almost, when you see that level of detail.
It's almost like Ferrari's garage is like almost like a horse stable, right? Even refers to it as the paddock. I don't want the other people in the paddock. And it's not a very high tech type facility like the big factory we saw in Ford v Ferrari, where Henry Ford II points out the window. He says, "You see that little factory? That's what beat Hitler in the war." And it's like the whole assembly line thing, whereas his is not. It's like a very small, almost rundown barn type. I mean, it looks nice on the outside with the stucco and everything, but then you go inside, it looks kind of run down, like somebody's old barn on their property or whatever, where they're building these things, because that's the level of craftsmanship that went into each vehicle that they made. And it's like, and that's why, and it's sort of a story you probably wouldn't believe if you didn't know it was true. Like, oh yeah, this is the ultimate underdog story where somebody's going to beat the big corporation at racing. Everything. This guy does it better than they do because he's not in it just for the, for the money. He's in it for the titles.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I hadn't thought about it that way. Certainly, there is this attention to detail and attention to speciality in his cars that make kings want to go and buy his cars. Chef Nation says, just like in House of Gucci, the wife held down the business while the boys went out and played. And I think there is some truth to that, but it does seem like Enzo also is doing a lot of work organizing
Well,
and designing as
I
well.
I know House of Gucci, they faked a lot of it. Like, they radically changed the order of events and things to make it seem like she was some big shot who had a lot more to do with it than she really didn't in reality. But that's really Scott. He changes things a lot, as we saw with Napoleon. So, whereas this was much more closer to reality in terms of, because again, this isn't trying to take you through the whole period. It's like I like to call these like snapshot movies, like an intimate portrait of, here's the person, this is how they dealt with things, but it doesn't have your typical narrative structure. Because in a sense, the movie doesn't really have a beginning or an ending, because the only real hint of a narrative is the wife trying to investigate, the other house and how that plays out.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up that scene because I love how they used opera. And of course, I guess it's very cliche to use opera in an Italian film, which you've seen so many times. But this was carefully constructed and done so beautifully and tastefully. And it didn't feel cliche. In fact, it felt almost, just so interesting. There's a scene, I think, right after she discovers what was going on. There's an opera scene, and then there's another opera scene after, right before the racing, I believe. And I think both were tastefully put in the film, and it was quite a dramatic point in their lives. And there's even a scene, Catherine, where they decide to show Enzo. I guess maybe around the time he started his affair with Shailene's character, and at the same time happily married to Laura with their son. At least I think that's what they were showing, kind of Enzo then and now. And I thought that was also very interesting, showing some of the good times he had with both characters, not necessarily making it seem as if every moment with Laura was, a dour one or a sad one. It certainly wasn't. And I thought that was a very interesting portrayal as well for them to put in the film. And sometimes I think artists want to put that in a film, but they don't know how to do it so that it seems realistic or real. It was a moment where you might think about the past and reminisce. And I think it was a nice transition from the first half of the film to, let's say, the race eventually, where we get, our climax at the end. Mike Alito says, while I was watching the movie, I kept wondering about all the cars being passed. Were some of these cars just people out for a drive? And I guess the answer is yes, right, Catherine?
Yeah, because like they're regular street cars, they don't have any markings on them. Like there's certainly no pace cars, and most of the time they're passing them. It's not like there's other. I mean, the only time we really see people gathered along the side of the road to watch them is at the site of the accident. But they're just like regular people around, kind of like the thing which flipped the car. If they had really surveyed it, we see that it's like one of those almost like those reflector bumpers in the middle of the road, except the ones that hold this down, you turn like a metal crank, and it wasn't turned down, it was facing up. Well, if they had, surveyed this and taken care of it, it wouldn't have been an issue. But, you can't have the same racing guys go 1,000 miles, but they didn't talk to everybody in the various districts or whatever to make sure, hey, check out the track and make sure it's fine. So yeah, you just have some people who are just out for a drive who either don't know or they're, oh, we'll be fine, just, God, it's crazy.
It was crazy. And Chef Nation says 150, you're not walking out of that one. No.
No.
And it was just so, I mean, I think it was interesting too, Catherine, you already mentioned this, that they gave you that first crash as sort of like a foreshadowing, I guess, in the beginning of the film of what was to come. I knew nothing about what was going to happen, so I was quite surprised to see it. But I think overall, this film was a great film. I think it's not a bad holiday film, although it is somewhat of a tragedy.
I can't remember if they had the shot in there, because there's a famous photograph called The Last Kiss, or The Kiss Goodbye. And it's, that driver's, famous girlfriend giving him a kiss right before they start that race.
Yeah.
And it's like the author, whoever took the photo, they don't know who actually took the photo, but it's a great photograph. And I couldn't remember if they actually recreated that in the film, maybe not, or I think they might have actually, but it was just really crazy if you could look that up and see it. It's a black and white photo. But to think about how that ended, because she's eagerly waiting for him at the end of the race. Like, where was he? He's like, oh, he was right behind us or whatever. And it's like, oh, geez. Just
right.
not it's like you don't wanna in her reaction when she finally does find out what happened. It's just oh god.
I'm
I'm
wondering if
wondering if
this is
this
the
is the
picture, but
picture,
I
but I
don't
don't
know if
know
this is it.
it.
And
And
of
another
course,
thing we didn't mention, the fact that Ferrari basically takes the car away from the scene of an accident before the police can investigate it because he wants to get his hands on it first, and then the police have to come to the paddock to confiscate it. It's like,
right.
geez, you know?
No, that was shocking, but to be honest with you, I'm not surprised that that happened, and I don't know, I think maybe they were responding to the emergency, and that emergency had to be dealt with right away. I think I have it, but it says it's in Wikipedia, but it's so small. History of Ferrari, why is this not showing bigger? But, Catherine, I think that if someone were to watch this film and they knew nothing about the Ferrari company or organization or anything like that, they would be even intrigued to know a little bit more about them. And you're right, it's called The Kiss of Death. Wow.
Okay, the kiss of death.
And I'm going to show it. It's a picture from Wikipedia. So I'm just going to pull this one down, and I was able to find it. I'm glad you mentioned that, Catherine, because I knew nothing about this.
That's a great photograph, but
Just and it says, it is a photograph taken moments before Portago's passing, documents him exchanging a kiss with actress Linda Christensen. What a tragic situation, Catherine, seeing this shot here. And he was so in love with her. And I think they tried to capture that in the film, how much he was fond of this woman. As of course, for Enzo was saying, can you please concentrate on your driving? It's interesting, Catherine, how they chose to talk about who was to blame for these crashes. The rationalization of, well, it's this person's mom or that person's girlfriend or whatever. What did you think about that type of rationalization? And was it just something that they had to do just to even cope with this?
well, I think part of it is as far as who Ferrari's gonna blame, he doesn't wanna think it's his car because that's why that was his impetus for going to initially, he's going to the crash site, not necessarily knowing how bad it is. He just wants to get his car to make sure it wasn't, "Oh, it's not my car that caused the problem." But then when he sees all the carnage there, he kinda does take a step back, but he still takes it, and once they see that from the tires that it's not that it hit something, that's the first thing he says when he walks out. He doesn't even talk about the tragedy, just, "It wasn't us." And so, of course, like he says, like you mentioned earlier, that he's clocking his driver, "Hey, why aren't you here on time?" And kind of getting in his face about it. And yeah, they're eager to blame anybody else. Like, "Oh, you're distracted. You need to, stop doing this whole playboy lifestyle. You need to focus on driving my car," type of thing. And so, yeah, you're always going to look for somebody else to blame, especially if you're somebody who doesn't give as much credit to the drivers as you do the car for being what the winner is. Even though certainly, obviously, the driver has a lot to do with it for being able to handle it, and you know,
Yeah, and I also wonder whether it's also a mindset of the era. I do not know the psyche of people internationally during that time period, but that might be a way that they decide to handle, some news that just is unspeakable or even unthinkable. An accident like that. I think the only other time I remember hearing about an accident like that was something that happened in Great Britain, where there was a similar accident and a car had the top. I don't know whether it was the full car or the what is it called when you lift up the hood or the bonnet of the
oh
car,
yeah,
and it came off and it went into a crowd of people. And,
there was
that
a
was
really bad one at Le Mans in I think it was the 1930s, and it's on the main straightaway at the end of the race,
Mhm.
right where the finish line is, and they got plowed through the he got wrecked, and he plowed through the hay bale barriers and killed like 25 people or 30 or something. And I'm surprised I didn't. I was like, wow, I didn't think the event would have survived that. Like I figured that would have been shut down or something after that. But it's dangerous, which is why I was, even as late as the 1960s, 1950s, to see people still standing behind one row of hay bales when cars are coming through that fast, or like the people in that town and that on that street where the crash happens, just standing in the little ditch right by like inches away from these cars. I'm like, this is insane,
and
you
it
know.
happened, for all practical purposes, this car is going 150 miles an hour, so they wouldn't see the car. Like, this is a hit that they can't avoid, so this is
No,
just
you can't
something.
even. Yeah, when you're standing that close, you can't even sit back and be able to see anything at that speed. It's like
Mhm.
even when I went to the Daytona 500, they're going about 150, 180 when they're coming around, and I was about 30 rows up. But you see them coming around and zooming in, but if you actually look right when they pass, you can't see. It's like a little blur. It's unbelievable. Like TV doesn't do it justice in terms of just how fast, getting the sense of speed for how fast these cars are actually going. So when you see everybody just gathering literally like a arm's length away from where the car is going when they're going those speeds, like one, I don't see the logic in trying to stand that close, and second, I'd be surprised that just the wind kicking back from the car doesn't knock you into the ditch. It's just, ugh. So when that, you're right, when that crash happened, because surely he hit the thing probably 100 yards or 80 yards away from the actual crowd before it started going, because he hit it and it went up into a barrel roll, aerial barrel roll before just running right through the people. It's like, gee, and it sucks because it's like the people were only standing in that one little area in front of those two houses, and yet flipped pretty high in the air and pretty far. If only it just went a little farther, they would have been all right. Well, I mean, not the driver, but and the navigator. But it's like, oh Jesus.
It really was terrible that it happened to hit them at that location.
And they didn't pull away on the camera either. I was for sure it wasn't going to be that and then it was. And it's like, and it's crazy because I knew it was coming, but I'm like, oh, they're never going to, even for an R-rated movie, they're not going to show this. I'm like, ugh. And then when they pan down the street for all the carnage and you see, like, as actually happened, it was mentioned the driver got ripped in half. Seeing the two, I was like, oh God, that's just so it's crazy. But you know, I mean, Formula One obviously is still really dangerous. Not as much for the public because they do them on close courses now, but or like Le Mans, where it's, you know, the public aren't allowed on the roads when they're doing it. But because obviously with Formula One at those speeds and the designs, there's very little you could do in terms of safety. It's pretty surprising to even to see drivers walk away from certain crashes in there, but it's still, it's yeah.
Yeah, and Mikey Ludo says, and both crashes were jaw dropping. That's
Mhm.
the truth. And certainly, recently, Catherine, it might be a few years ago, the driver who kind of, you know, I don't think it was Formula One, it might have been NASCAR. And one driver nicked another guy's car. I could be getting this all wrong, but he got out of the car on the racetrack and he got killed. And they're like, it's against the law. You can't ever get out of your car on the racetrack.
I know that happened at a dirt race years ago with Tony Stewart, where the driver kind of crashed his car a bit on the outside, and it was a dirt track at night, and there were no lights on that side of the track. He blamed Tony Stewart for the wreck. He got out of the car and started walking down the track, and he yielded to the first two cars that came. He stepped back, so he knew it was dangerous. But for some reason, when Tony came by, he decided to get down even closer and then turned around, turning his back to him, kind of flip out, not looking. And Tony, on the video, if you don't know any better, it looks like he's ramming up, but he's not. He's accelerating as fast, because the only way to avoid hitting, like on a dirt track like that, you have to gun it and turn at the same time to turn really fast into the turn. Because you can't, if you hit the brakes on a dirt track, it's just going to slide forward like that. And it was so close that it was literally the only thing he could do. And a bunch of people who didn't know any better thought he just accelerated to run the guy up. It's like, no, he didn't. He was trying to get out of the way. But it's like, and it was even a rule before then. You're not supposed to get out of your car when you're on the racetrack until safety vehicles are there to make sure it's okay. Or unless, of course, your car's on fire or there's that type of emergency. But you know, they still, you know, crack down on that. And then other drivers, you know, you're in a race to get people out of it. Like I remember the ending of the Daytona 500 a few years ago. Ryan Newman's car got hit, and it happened to be the driver's side door and the driver's side roof that kept getting all the hits, pounding on the car, tumbling, and it landed upside down on an embankment. And the gasoline was coming out of the fuel tank and dripping and pooling into his section where he was sitting, because he was trapped upside down. And they even put up like a privacy screen because they weren't sure if he was going to be pulled out in one piece or not. And amazingly, he was. And 2 days later, he walks out of the hospital under his own power, which was unbelievable and very inspiring. Because when you see that crash, it was just, oh my God. But with stock car racing, obviously there's more they could do for safety. But with Formula One and stuff like this, especially back in those days, there's nothing. I mean, you're done in that kind of situation, which is why you got to be really brave and really confident and really, really good at what you do to not like lose it or freak out when you're doing this, which is why I'd say Ferrari was wrong. The drivers absolutely have a lot to do with why you win the race. It's definitely not just the car.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that, and it is something that makes you ponder after seeing the film, and hello to Miss Martin Muses, who is here tonight as well, and the Bosco Scenario, hello to you as well, thanks for stopping by. Catherine, I have to say that I enjoyed this film tremendously. I walked in not knowing what it was gonna be, not understanding what it was about, but I felt that the balance between, the personal life of the Ferraris, and his, let's say his mistress and son, and this incredible story of let's say this doomed race that they were going to win, but the win, was bittersweet, had a great balance to it. What did you think overall, Catherine?
Well, I really liked it because again, it's not doing the typical biopic thing. We're going to show, oh, this is when he's a little kid. This is how he got into the business and blah blah. Like they don't really do that. They just give you a few pieces of information. He founded the company in 1939. Now they tell you about the time in the war, how the factory kept getting bombed, and how he tried to survive the war and not get it, completely taken over by the fascists and all that. But and how he met, and that's where he met his mistress in 1945. But it's just it falls into the category of what I call snapshot movies because I find biopics when you're trying to tell their whole life story, it can be a bit much, and it's more like paint by numbers and very plot driven at that point. Whereas a movie like this, it felt much more character driven because you're not trying to tell their entire life story in 2.5 hours. You're just telling again, you're focusing much more on the person and their feelings and their emotions and how they deal with things, which is why this doesn't have that traditional beginning, middle, and end, so to speak. But I really liked it for that all the more. And it's Michael Mann, and which I haven't even mentioned his name throughout the whole movie or for that whole review. But this is the guy who made Heat. He's still definitely got it, and he just elevates him. He's a really good director.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Mann is 80 now, and he hasn't lost his touch, and the film feels cool. It does have that sense of, I wouldn't mind hanging out with this crowd, Catherine, if I had to hang out with a group of race car drivers. I might want to hang out with the Ferrari team. I don't know about you, but it seems like they certainly have an exciting life and made history uh, as well. So I recommend the film to anybody. I think it's a great entertaining film. It makes its point, it gets its point across. And they do a good job of presenting this moment in history that was so important at that time, that many people looked at race car driving then, and perhaps maybe earning a little bit more respect, as you said, for the drivers who are putting their lives on the line there, while also making the film exciting. The sound quality was excellent. The music was excellent. I really couldn't find very much wrong with this film. So, guys, if you haven't seen Ferrari, I would say go ahead and see this film. You're gonna enjoy it. Catherine, any final thoughts on the film?
I look forward to seeing it again, probably with my dad. I think it was pretty good, and I do look forward to seeing it, adding this one to my collection because it was. I just wish there were more, but because majority of biopics are the more let's tell the whole life story thing, and I wish there were kind of more of them like this because these are the ones where you kind of really get inside the people's heads, so to speak, and it's paced really well too. For another, it's another thing. It doesn't feel like it's like with all of those other biopics where it's very laborious or you're going through their whole life. It's like, and they deliberately slow down the pacing to make it feel like it's going on for. It's like this doesn't do that. It's like it feels just as hectic and chaotic how it's bouncing around all these other things, just as it would have been. Uh, and just again, the way that his life is portrayed and that how everybody in the media will do whatever he says, how they will keep the secret from his wife because he says so. And yeah, social media may help gossip spread, but it's not the only way that gossip spreads. So the fact that they were able to that didn't spread like wildfire back then is just a testament to just how much this guy was worshipped at like the top of the pyramid, that people don't want to upset him. And it just really, other than, and only people who could really talk back to him are his wife and his mother. uh, so that was, I was like, wow, that's kind of trippy. And again, it's like a little engine that could thing. You wouldn't think that a guy who literally builds a few cars out of a barn like that would be beating all the other guys at the racetracks, but he did because that's the thing. He's an artist, and that's
Yeah,
how he really treated his cars. And the way, like when he's sitting and he's sharing with his son the design of the engine, he says, "You know what happens to the engine? Yeah, the water goes in, but you know why the square engine doesn't work? Because it gets slower. You know what happens if we curve it? It flows faster." It's like, yeah, it flows faster, and it's like that's the kind of always thinking about that, and that's and he's CEO and he's still doing this type of stuff. You
mhm.
never see CEOs of big automakers today being the ones in the grunt workers in the shop, like tinkering like that. Like it doesn't happen anymore. But he was a real, like even Henry Ford II, as shown in Ford v Ferrari, he ain't doing anything in the factory. He didn't seem to have much respect for the work. Ferrari's had respect for his workers, as you see a bit in the movie. Even the ones who are threatening to walk out, he helps them out a bit. But it's like it it's just wow. You kind of wish that there were more people like this in the racing world. But it's really uh, I think the movie is pretty good, and I do recommend it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Catherine, when I see a scene like that, I always imagine it's made for somebody like me who doesn't know anything about cars whatsoever. I don't know. I understand that they have an engine and they might have all these different parts, but I'm not ever going to learn about the way an engine works or anything like that. And those little tidbits can help somebody like me who wants to enjoy this film and understand what he's doing. And even just what was it, 5 minutes? Put in there so that you get a sense of how important design was to him, how
Mhm.
important it was to achieve excellence, and how he was passing that on to his son. We saw him doing it and kind of training him in the business. This is exactly the type of intimate moments and the scene building, character development that you can read about, but to see it just in front of you, you do feel like you've gotten a very special moment and something that was maybe the heart of the film, Catherine. That
Yeah.
scene, and I think that it's you can when you can have special moments like that, that's when Michael Mann and his talent just shines in being able to give us that level of understanding of such a talented creator, a talented engineer and builder as Enzo Ferrari. So I think they've done just a spectacular job doing that. And I enjoy the film immensely. And hello to Bonzo Kilborn here.
Yeah, it's like he is. It's like you see in Ford v Ferrari how they're constantly trying to figure out how to make the cars lighter. It's like, oh, if it's a lighter, it'll go faster. It's like, well, true, but then over here you have Ferrari, who's like, forget just shedding the weight. Let's just let's redesign the engine from the ground up to make the thing go faster to begin with. That's like another whole thing in terms of the difference between. It's like one is like a garage project that all the everybody's chipping in on, where he is it's literally doing it at his dinner table, just like that kind of thing. And so it's like it's very interesting because this one again is more of a in a sense a biopic in the offbeat sense, whereas the Ford v Ferrari is more of a like yeah, they picked the name because it's gonna sell more tickets, but it wasn't really about one car company versus another so much. It was about these couple guys trying to get in the race. But it's neat when you see how the differences in approach to business and designing cars and how that pays off.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Slice Died at Twitter, Instagram, uh, YouTube, and you can also find me on the Fantasmagorium Show YouTube channel every Thursday night. Scotty R37 and I are reviewing the Fargo TV show. We've already covered season 1 and the movie. We're currently doing season 5, and we will do the remaining seasons. And so we have a lot of fun there. And every second and fourth Sunday of the month on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel at 8 a.m. Pacific is the Unifying Force, a Star Wars talk show that I'm on as co-host. We have a lot of fun there. So, and then I'm also at Letterboxd at Slice Night as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that with us. And guys, you can always find me here on Positive Fandom on the Burnettwork and also on my other channel, Roman Empire Matters. Catherine, it was such a pleasure having you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Catherine and I will be back again next Friday when we do our PGS moving image review for the Iron Claw. And I can't wait for that one. But until then, guys, Happy New Year. For those of you out there, hope you enjoy this New Year and holiday season. I want to thank all of you for being here. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care.